Have you ever heard a sky scream? Not the thunder you expect on a humid afternoon, not the wind howling between apartment blocks during typhoon season, but something else. A raw, rupturing sound that cuts through the quiet outline of normal life and carves a warning into your bones. 14-year-old Haruto Sato remembered that moment for the rest of his life. He was sweeping dust off the wooden porch of his family's small home, humming a tune his mother always sang while doing laundry. The morning smelled of steamed rice and pine smoke from nearby chimneys. His biggest worry that day had been whether he'd finish his homework before Kenji and Masato dragged him on another rooftop adventure. Normal, predictable, safe, until that sound. A low rumble clawed across the sky. At first, Haruto thought it was thunder from a distant storm. But no storm rolled across the horizon. Instead, it was clear, too clear, the kind of blue that felt endless and peaceful. The rumble grew louder, sharper, more insistent, like a roar with purpose. Haruto froze. The broom slipped from his fingers. A strange chill crept up his spine, as though the sound was not just passing overhead, but searching for him. Haruto! His mother stepped out of the kitchen. Inside, now! Before he could move, a second, unmistakable growl shook the air. That was the moment the sky stopped being a friend. And the war, which had always felt like a distant story, took its first step into Haruto's life. Kenji and Masato had already disappeared toward the old shrine, an unofficial signal they wanted Haruto to join them. He sprinted after them, heart pounding. By the time Haruto reached the rooftop ladder, Kenji was already on the tiles, his hair whipping in the wind. "Come see," Kenji called out, excitement bubbling in his voice. "It's planes. Maybe they're ours doing drills." Masato frowned from the edge of the roof, his eyes locked on the approaching shapes. "Ours don't fly that low," he muttered. Haruto climbed up, wiping sweat from his palms. From the roof, the city spread out before them, its wooden houses, narrow streets, small shops, and temple courtyards. Tokyo felt so big and so small at the same time, and above it all, black shapes sliced across the sky. Haruto squinted. They weren't like the Japanese aircraft he'd seen in newspapers or posters. These were heavier, more angular, with a different heartbeat in their engines. Masato whispered, "Those are American." The word hit Haruto like a punch. American. The enemy. The ones their teachers said were weak, too soft for real war. If that was true, why did the ground vibrate under their wings? The first explosion didn't sound real. It sounded like the earth inhaled sharply, and then exhaled fire. Even from miles away, the boys felt the roof tremble beneath them. A pillar of smoke rose somewhere beyond the palace district. People dropped buckets, tools, groceries. Women grabbed children's hands. Men shouted orders no one could understand. Doors slammed. Windows rattled. The second explosion shattered the illusion that Japan was untouchable. The city erupted in panic. Roofs shook. Lanterns swung violently. Even the crows flew in terrified spirals. Haruto's breath caught. He'd never heard his mother scream before, but her voice carried through the streets. "Haruto!" He climbed down so fast he scraped his hands on the ladder. His knees nearly buckled when another blast echoed, closer this time. Masato stared at the rising smoke, his voice barely a whisper. "They told us the war was far away." Kenji swallowed hard. "They lied." Haruto wanted to deny it, but the sky had already spoken. The war had arrived. Thousands of miles from home, yet only heartbeats away in fate, Captain Thomas Hale steadied the controls of his B-25 bomber. Sweat dripped down the back of his neck as he flew low over Tokyo, engines screaming, adrenaline exploding in his veins. He wasn't a man built for destruction. He wrote poetry in the margins of training manuals. He collected postcards from every city he'd been stationed in. He kept his wife's last letter tucked inside his jacket every mission. But he flew today because he believed something painful. Sometimes, to stop a greater darkness, you must strike even when you don't want to. As the bombs dropped, he whispered, "Not as a soldier, but as a man. I hope someday you'll forgive us." He didn't know who he was speaking to. A mother holding a child, a boy on a rooftop, a stranger who might read his words one day. He didn't know that those words would outlive him. Haruto reached home to find his mother trembling near the entrance. A portion of their wooden fence had been scorched by a stray ember from a nearby blast site. "Are you hurt?" Haruto gasped. "No," she whispered, pulling him into a tight embrace. "No, my son, we're alive. That is the blessing today." Neighbors gathered around the street, exchanging fearful glances. A grandmother clutched her prayer beads so tightly they left marks on her palms. A shopkeeper muttered prayers under his breath. Children cried into their mothers' kimonos. Haruto looked around and saw something he had never seen before. The adults didn't know what to do. Then he realized something worse. They were afraid to admit it. That night, every household gathered by their radios. The government issued its statement. "The damage is minor. Enemy planes have been repelled. There is no cause for fear." The words felt polished, confident. But the people weren't fooled anymore. Masato's father shook his head. "Minor damage? I saw flames from the palace district," Kenji whispered. "If they can reach Tokyo, what else have they lied about?" Haruto didn't speak. He was thinking of the roaring engines, the fire, the trembling earth. He was thinking of how small he felt. He whispered to himself, "Why weren't we prepared?" He wasn't sure if he meant the army or himself. After completing the raid, Thomas Hale's crew ditched their aircraft over China. The lanterns of a remote village glowed faintly below as they parachuted into the night. As the others slept, Thomas wrote in his logbook, "War is cruel. I pray that the people we frighten today survive to see peace. I pray that someday one of them will know my heart was never made for killing." He folded the letter, intending to mail it, but he never got the chance. A later mission would take his life. The diary pages, inked with regret, hope, and humanity, would drift far away from him into the hands of someone who needed them more. 3 days after the raid, fishermen discovered a scorched, leather-bound notebook tangled in seaweed along the docks. The cover was burned, but the pages inside were surprisingly intact. People feared it. "No one touch it," a man said. "It could be enemy codes." Another whispered, "What if it's a trap?" But Haruto felt something stir inside him. A curiosity, a strange pull. He stepped forward before he could talk himself out of it. "I'll look at it." Gasps echoed around him. But Haruto wasn't being brave, only drawn by a quiet voice in his mind he couldn't explain. Inside the notebook, written in neat English handwriting, he saw fragments. Hope, forgive, future. He didn't understand all the words, but he understood the feeling. Haruto showed the notebook to Masato, whose uncle taught English at a university. The man spent hours translating the entries. When he finished, he handed the notebook back with a troubled look. The writer, he was one of the American pilots. Kenji recoiled. "What? Then burn it." Masato shook his head. "No, listen." He flipped the notebook open and read, "If fear must fall from the sky today, then someday may peace rise in its place." Kenji's anger faltered. Haruto felt his breath hitch. Why would a man dropping bombs write like that? Why wasn't he filled with hatred? For the first time, Haruto felt something shift inside him, a crack in everything he'd been taught. Haruto showed the notebook to his mother that evening. Candlelight flickered across her face as she read the translated pages. She read slowly, carefully, thoughtfully. When she closed the notebook, she didn't look angry. She looked sad. War makes victims of everyone, she murmured, even the ones holding the weapons. Haruto frowned. But he hurt us. Yes, she said, and still he hoped for peace. Remember that. She placed her hand gently on the notebook. It is easy to hate what hurts us. It is harder to understand it. Haruto stared at the worn leather cover. For the first time, he wondered, what if understanding was the only way to stop the hurt from continuing? The question stayed with him long after the candle burned out. Not everyone was ready to see humanity in the enemy. Kenji arrived at Haruto's home one afternoon, cheeks red, fists clenched. His footsteps struck the floor with the force of thunder as he confronted Haruto. "How can you read that notebook?" he snapped. "How can you even touch something from the people who attacked us?" Haruto opened his mouth, but Kenji wasn't done. The emotion he'd been swallowing for days finally broke through the surface. "My uncle's friend died in one of the fires," he choked out. "They said the planes hit a warehouse, but he was in the wrong place at the wrong time. And I'm supposed to believe the enemy cares about peace." His voice cracked. "He didn't care about my uncle's friend. He didn't care about us." Haruto had never seen Kenji cry like that, angry, wounded tears he tried to hide by turning away. Haruto placed the notebook on the table between them. "I don't expect you to forgive him," he said gently. "I don't know if I can, but maybe this isn't about forgiving. Maybe it's about understanding why we're all hurting." Kenji punched the wall lightly. "I'm tired of understanding," he said. "I just want things to make sense again." Haruto nodded. He understood that feeling perfectly. While Tokyo slowly rebuilt, Captain Thomas Hale's fate took a darker turn. Weeks after the Doolittle Raid, he was assigned a rescue mission over the Pacific. The weather reports were wrong. A storm descended unexpectedly, swallowing the horizon in black clouds. The radio crackled. Static, distortion, then silence. His crew searched for him. Naval forces searched. Even nearby villagers kept watch. But Thomas Hale's plane never returned. His wife received a letter that read, "Only, missing in action." She held on to hope for as long as her heart allowed, keeping his poetry books on the nightstand and his uniform neatly folded in the closet. Little did she know, a piece of her husband had survived on the other side of the world. Not his body, not his belongings, but his words, floating across oceans into the hands of a boy who would grow up believing in peace. While the physical raid had ended in a single afternoon, the emotional impact lingered far longer. Every time Haruto read Thomas's writing, he felt something shift inside him. The pages spoke of fear, doubt, duty, and a longing for peace. They were raw, honest, and painfully human. Haruto began reading small sections aloud to Kenji and Masato. At first, Kenji scoffed. Then he fell silent. Then he started asking questions. Did he really say he hated war? Was he forced to fly? Did he know he might die? Slowly, the rage in Kenji's eyes softened. It didn't vanish, but it made room for something else. Understanding. Masato, meanwhile, became almost obsessed with the idea of words bridging two worlds. "Imagine," he said one evening, "someone drops bombs on your city, yet their heart says something completely different. Isn't that worth thinking about?" The second raid wasn't one of fire or steel. It was the raid of the heart, forcing the boys to confront the truth that war had no simple villains or heroes, just people. One quiet evening by the riverbank, Masato sat beside Haruto, skipping stones across the water. The sunset painted the surface orange and red, as if the world itself was a reflection of fire and hope, intertwined. Masato sighed. "My father puts on a brave face," he said, "but after the raid I heard him whisper to my mother that he felt fear for the first time since he was a child." Haruto looked over. Masato never spoke about his father's feelings. Masato continued, Adults pretend they know everything. They pretend they're not scared, but that day, they were just as lost as us. He paused, then added quietly, "What if Thomas, the pilot, was scared too? What if everyone is scared and war just forces us to hide it?" Haruto stared at the notebook resting in his lap. "Then maybe fear isn't the enemy," he said softly. "Maybe not understanding each other is." The river carried away their words, but the revelation stayed. Kenji's transformation didn't come gently. Days after hearing more entries from the notebook, he exploded during an argument with two soldiers in the marketplace. They laughed at him for asking whether Americans also feared death. "Why should you care about the feelings of a cowardly enemy?" one soldier ridiculed. Kenji snapped, not with violence but with raw emotion. "Because I'm tired of being angry," he shouted. "I'm tired of pretending I know who the enemy is." The soldiers scoffed and walked away, but Kenji stood trembling. Haruto and Masato found him by the shrine afterward, tears streaking his cheeks. He whispered, "I don't want to hate anymore. It feels like poison in my chest." Haruto placed Thomas's notebook in Kenji's hands. Kenji opened it, tracing the careful handwriting. "He wrote about missing his wife," Kenji said. He sounds like anyone else." Masato nodded. "Maybe that's the whole point." For the first time since the raid, Kenji breathed without shaking. The boys made a decision that felt larger than themselves. "This notebook doesn't belong to one of us," Haruto said. "It belongs to all of us. To the truth." They wrapped it in silk, a gift from Haruto's mother, and placed it beneath the floorboards of the shrine storage house. Not as a relic of war, but as a message. War is not glory. War is not pride. War is pain felt by ordinary people on both sides. Masato set the final board back in place. "One day," he said, "someone will find this again, and maybe the world will be different by then." It was a quiet moment, simple, sacred. Their secret stayed buried, one they would carry into adulthood. Time moved on, as it always does, reluctantly but relentlessly. The war ended, ruins were rebuilt, families mourned, healed, and tried to forget. Haruto grew into a gentle, thoughtful teacher. His students loved him because he listened, really listened, in a way most adults didn't. Masato became a translator, helping bridge communication between Japan and foreign visitors as the world opened up. Kenji, once hot-headed and impulsive, became a carpenter who built homes for families who had lost theirs, saying it made him feel like he was repairing the world one wall at a time. Yet all three remained bound by a quiet truth. They had learned to see humanity in the enemy, a gift most people never receive. The sky above Tokyo no longer screamed. But sometimes Haruto still looked up, remembering the sound that changed everything. One warm spring afternoon, Haruto received an unexpected visitor. An elderly American woman stood in the doorway of his classroom, supported by a younger translator. Her hands trembled slightly as she clutched a faded photograph of a young pilot. "My name is Eleanor Hale," she said through the translator. "My husband, Thomas Hale, never came home from the war." Haruto felt the world slow. She continued, "I was told something of his might have reached Japan, a journal, a notebook. They said someone might have found it." Haruto's breath caught. Masato and Kenji flashed through his mind. The shrine, the silk-wrapped bundle. He whispered, "Please wait here." Then he ran. His feet remembered the path to the old shrine even after all those years. He slid aside the floorboard, heart pounding, and there it was, untouched, waiting, just as they'd left it. He held it gently, reverently. The last words of a man who had crossed oceans, words that had saved three boys from hatred. Now, after decades, they would return home. Haruto returned to the classroom, notebook trembling in his hands. When Eleanor saw it, she pressed both palms to her mouth. Tears spilled down her cheeks before she even touched it. This is his handwriting, she whispered, voice cracking. I haven't seen it in so long. Haruto bowed deeply. Your husband changed my life, he said in halting English. Eleanor looked up, confused but hopeful. How? Haruto's voice wavered with emotion. His words taught me that even in war, people are still people. Because of him, I grew up believing peace is possible. Eleanor clutched the notebook to her chest as if it were her husband's embrace returned across time. You don't know, she whispered, how much this means to me. But Haruto did know, because it had meant the world to him too. Before leaving, Eleanor handed Haruto a small yellowed envelope. I found this among his things, she said. It was written on the day of the raid, but never mailed. Something told me. It belonged with you. Haruto opened it carefully. Inside was a single letter addressed not to his wife, not to the American military, but to whoever finds this someday. He read, If fate places this letter in your hands, then we are no longer enemies. Whatever happens up there in the sky, remember it is the decisions of nations, not the hearts of ordinary people, that make us fight. If my life must end, let my words be the part of me that survives, not fear, not hatred, but hope. Hope that one day someone brave enough will look past uniforms and see the human inside. Maybe that someone is you. Thomas Hale. Haruto lowered the page slowly, emotions flooding him. The sky that had once screamed now felt calm, soft, almost forgiving. The twist was clear. The raid that once brought terror had delivered a message of peace that outlived the war itself. And Haruto, once a frightened boy on a rooftop, now stood as living proof that a single person's words could change the heart of an entire future.